The callousness of her words hit James like a physical blow. He took a step forward, his voice low and intense. "That brat is a 4-year-old little girl who just lost her father. She needed love and support, and instead, you threw her out like trash." Laura sneered, unrepentant. "She's not my responsibility. I have my own life to live. Besides, who's going to care about one little orphan?" "I care," James said, his voice ringing with conviction. "And so does every decent person who hears about what you've done. You had a choice, Mrs. Thompson. You could have been a mother to a child who desperately needed one. Instead, you chose cruelty and selfishness." As Sarah began to read Laura her rights, James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had confronted the darkness that had threatened Mia's future, and in doing so, he'd taken the first step toward healing his own past wounds. Walking out of Laura's house, James knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal battles, adjustments, and challenges he couldn't yet foresee. But he also knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in his soul, that he was ready to face whatever came next, for Mia's sake. And for the father he still hoped to be. James was ready to embrace this second chance with open arms. After clearing it with Child Protective Services and his superiors, James found himself driving home with Mia in the backseat, her few belongings packed in a small bag beside her. As they entered his house, James felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It had been so long since a child's laughter had filled these rooms. "Let's get you settled in," he said, leading Mia to the spare room. "Tomorrow, we can go shopping and get some things to make it feel more like your own space." That night, as James tucked Mia into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Officer James," she mumbled. "Yes, sweetheart, will you read me a story?" "Daddy always read me a story." James's heart melted. "Of course, I will. What story would you like?" And so began a nightly ritual. Each evening, James would read to Mia, doing his best to use silly voices just as her father had done. It wasn't long before bedtime became his favorite part of the day. Over the next few weeks, as the legal proceedings against Laura began to unfold, James and Mia settled into a routine. They had breakfast together each morning, with James making silly faces with fruit on Mia's pancakes to make her giggle. In the evenings, they drew pictures together or baked cookies, flour inevitably ending up on both their noses. One Saturday afternoon, as they sat at the kitchen table coloring, Mia looked up at James with a serious expression. "Officer James," she asked. "Yes, Mia, can I call you Daddy?" James felt his heart skip a beat. He took a deep breath, fighting back the sudden rush of emotion. "Mia," he said gently, "I'm honored that you want to call me that, but I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace your real daddy. He'll always be your daddy, and it's okay to miss him and love him." Mia nodded solemnly. "I know, but I think my real daddy would be happy that I have you now, too." James smiled, blinking back tears. "I think you're right, and I would be very, very happy if you want to call me Daddy." Mia's face broke into a radiant smile, and she threw her arms around him. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered, as James held her close. He marveled at how this little girl had changed his life so completely in such a short time. The house that had once felt so empty was now filled with laughter and love. Meanwhile, the case against Laura was progressing rapidly. James worked tirelessly with the district attorney's office, providing all the evidence he had gathered about Laura's neglect and abandonment of Mia. As news of the case spread through the community, public outrage grew. Laura, who had once been a fixture in local society circles, found herself shunned by her former friends. Her country club membership was revoked, and invitations to social events dried up. One evening, as James was preparing dinner, he received a call from the district attorney. "We've got her, Miller," the DA said, excitement evident in his voice. "Laura's been charged with child endangerment and neglect. She's facing serious jail time." James let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That's great news. What about her assets?" "The judge has frozen them pending the outcome of the trial," the DA replied. "If she's convicted, which seems likely given the evidence, she'll be ordered to pay substantial restitution. Most of it will go into a trust for Mia's future." As James hung up the phone, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Justice was being served, and Mia's future was secure. He turned to find Mia standing in the doorway, a concerned look on her face. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" she asked. James knelt down, pulling her into a hug. "Everything's great, sweetheart. How about we celebrate with ice cream sundaes for dessert tonight?" Mia's face lit up with joy, and as they laughed together, scooping ice cream and piling on toppings, James knew that this was exactly where he was meant to be. The day of Laura's sentencing arrived, and James sat in the courtroom, his heart pounding. Mia was staying with Sarah for the day, spared from having to face her stepmother again. As Laura was led into the courtroom, James was struck by how different she looked from the polished, arrogant woman he'd first encountered. Her designer clothes were replaced by a plain suit, her perfectly styled hair now limp and dull. The judge's voice rang out in the silent courtroom. "Laura Thompson, you have been found guilty of child endangerment and neglect. Your actions were not just a failure of responsibility, but a betrayal of the most basic human decency." Laura stood, her face pale, as the judge continued, "I hereby sentence you to 5 years in state prison. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $500 to be placed in a trust for Mia Thompson's care and future education." As the gavel fell, sealing Laura's fate, James felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction that justice had been served, but also a deep sadness for the pain Mia had endured. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. James spoke briefly, his words carefully chosen. Today, justice was served not just for Mia, but for all children who deserve love, protection, and care. Let this be a reminder that our responsibility to the most vulnerable among us is sacred, and those who shirk that responsibility will be held accountable. As he drove home, James's thoughts turned to Mia. He couldn't wait to see her, to hold her, and assure her that she was safe and loved. When he walked through the door, Mia ran to him, throwing her arms around his legs. "Daddy, you're home." James scooped her up, hugging her tightly. "I sure am, princess. How about we have a special movie night to celebrate?" As they snuggled on the couch later, Mia tucked securely under his arm, James marveled at how far they'd come. The little girl who had once been so scared and alone was now thriving, her laughter filling his home and his heart. He knew there would be challenges ahead. Mia would have questions about her past, and there would be difficult conversations as she grew older, but James was committed to being there for her every step of the way. As Mia drifted off to sleep, her head resting on his chest, James whispered a quiet promise. "I'll always be here for you, sweetheart, always." And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their little family, James knew that he had found his true calling, not just as a police officer protecting his community, but as a father, nurturing and guiding the precious life that had been entrusted to him. The journey ahead might not be easy, but with love, patience, and understanding, James was confident that together, he and Mia could face anything life might throw their way.